Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. My name is Jeff Marshall. Today we're going to talk about Sus2 and Sus4 chords. And what are they and how can we use them and all kinds of fun stuff. We'll get into some diagrams and stuff, but let's first talk about what are Sus2 and Sus4 chords. What does sus mean? I guess sus is short for suspended, right? So basically what it is you're creating a chord with out the third in the chord. So for example, if you have a G major triad, the notes of G major triad would be G, B, and D. So by suspending it with a Sus4, you move the third up to the fourth, which would be B up to C, or a Sus2 would be using the A instead of the B. So here's a quick example, and we'll go through these more in depth here. So here's a regular old G major triad. Now you see we got G, that's the root, major third, and then the fifth, right? G, B, and D. So if we put our pinky down here on this C note, effectively it's going in front of that B, which is the major third, which is suspending it. Okay? And, you know, you could call this Sus4. Now if I replace the major third here with the 2, which would be A, we'd have a Sus2 chord because there's no third in that chord. Now the interesting thing about sus chords is technically they're not major or minor, just depends on how you use them, I suppose. So they can have a really cool kind of ambiguous sound to it, you know. And this, to me, it sounds really interesting because after a while, after you've been playing for a while, some of the things that maybe you were excited about a few years ago are not quite as exciting anymore and you want to hear some new sounds. So you can hear this, you know, I'm totally into like blues and jazz and rock and everything. I think one guy that uses this stuff a lot is maybe someone like Eric Johnson. You're going to get some Eric Johnson-y kind of sounds out of this. So let's jump in and see what's happening. Hey friends, if you are enjoying and getting something out of this content, please subscribe and share. And of course, if you want to go a little bit deeper, please consider joining my Patreon site. There's a link in the description. And also, I'm now offering channel memberships. If you don't want to jump off of YouTube, you can just become a member and support the channel that way. There'll be different tiers. I invite you to check it out, and I hope to see you there. Okay, I got the old split screen here so you can see my hands, but I also have the neck. So let's just kind of review what I just went over there. So here's a G major triad, just for easy seeing ability here. So you see the root, the third, and the fifth, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to put the fourth. Now this would be a Sus4 because it's in front of the third, right? And you can always resolve it down. Right? That's a nice move. Again, here's our third. Now we could, instead of playing the third, we could play the 2. And that would be a Sus2 chord. So again, kind of an ambiguous sound. If I put the G in the bass there, it's just a really nice sound. And you can add some notes to it. I'm going to just stick to these 3 notes right now. Now here's the cool thing, is you can invert these, right? So what I like to do is assign them to a string group. So right now I'm on the kind of the middle strings, the D, G, and B. And to me, this is kind of the sweet spot on the guitar. It's not too high, not too low. It stays out of the way of the bass player, but it doesn't get too thin sounding. So I do a lot of work on these middle strings, to be honest with you. But we'll look at some other shapes too as we go along. So the next thing we want to do is find the inversion of this chord, right? So what that means is taking the 2, which in this case is an A, and putting that in the bass. So I'm going to do this with a different color here. And this shape would look something like this. Okay, so now we have, see again, very ambiguous kind of sound, but very nice against a G chord. And then we can also find another inversion by taking the 5th here, which is D, and moving it down to the D string. We can see what the next inversion would be here. So we would have, there we go. All right. So just for fun, let's go ahead. I'm going to put a little backing track I found here on YouTube. It just basically goes from G major 7 to C major 7. I'm not really even going to think about it too much, but what I can do is I can see the C Sus2 here. I can see it here, right? So I'm just going to go back and forth between the G and the C. All right, sounds pretty cool so far. As you'll see, these chord shapes can double duty. All right, so for example, let me jump over to my hands here. This is how we can kind of start to see it as another chord, right? So this G Sus2 chord here could also be a D Sus4, right? So like right here, here's that G Sus2 next inversion. If I lower the G note, it just goes right to a D major triad. So now I'm just combining them with just kind of the G, C, and D, kind of a 1-4-5 kind of thing, just moving those different inversions around. So I've got G here, and then I've got C here, and then D here. See how that's all just, I'm just moving around between the G chord, the D chord, and the C chord just to get some different colors. But I could play those against this backing track and get some interesting sounds. Now, I will say I'm not really, I don't have a formula. I'm just winging this, right? Using those different shapes. I'm just using my ear to kind of guide me where I might want to go next as far as a shape is concerned. Let's try that again against that same track. Pretty cool, right? So the thing is I'm just trying to create kind of a soundscape, and the more you do it, the better you get, obviously. But I'm using my ear and kind of how the chord is making my, how my soul feels, if that's a thing, and then I'm just kind of going, okay, well, this shape feels a little unsettled, so I'll move it to a different shape until I feel it kind of resolve. And you can still use the triad, right? So I can still use C, or I can still use G. So I got all this movement, instead of just kind of like banging away on a G major 7 chord. It's cool. So, that's cool, but it just starts to get boring after a while. So you got this really cool method of getting some interesting, little bit more sophisticated sounds. Let's take it up a notch, all right? So let's jump back over to our diagram here. And I'm going to move up to the next diagram, okay? So now just hopefully you can kind of see both of these. Let's see. So what we're going to do is I'm going to try to shrink this down just a smidge, so we can see both diagrams, because what they're going to do is they're going to morph a little bit into some new shapes, and I'll show you how to do this. It's really simple. Okay, so here's our original right here. Okay, now we can of course start to see these on different string groups. So right here we could take this root tone here, this G note here, and we can put it on top. So now we would have something like this, right? And this would be our root right here. So now we've got this. it's the same chord, right? And we can do that with all of our inversions. So the next one, this inversion here, now this note here, which is in the bass, we can move that up an octave to the high E string, and we would get something like this, right? So now we've got, and then on the last one here, we can move that D up to the high E string, and we would get something like this. So now we've got, there we go. Here it is on these strings, then on these strings, right? And we can combine those in many different ways. Okay, so we can keep going. Of course, what you want to do is transpose this to maybe C and D, which is the other major chords in the key, right? But I'll show you can go even further than that. Okay, so let's do even another version. Let's go back to the original shape here, and then we're going to morph this. We're going to modify this, okay? Whoops, that's not right. Let's get rid of that. Okay, here's our original shape. Now what we're going to do is we're going to bump this note up an octave, and we get something like this, right? This is kind of a stacked fifth chord. So now we've got, these are kind of close voicings, and that's a spread voicing, right? And we can do that with all of our inversions of this chord too, right? So here is, now we could take this note right here, which is, we're going to take the middle note here and move it up an octave, which would put us here. So this one would be something like this. So we got, there. So now we're spreading it out a little bit, and you know, maybe you're hearing some of that Eric Johnson-y stuff come into play here. Okay, let's go to the next one. This is our original shape. Okay, now if we want to get really ambitious, we could bump this note up an octave here. Now this gets a little bit of a stretch. So you could theoretically, because you're putting the fifth here, you could put the second here, so you could get something like this. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's go back. So we would get something like this. Now, it just depends. Some people would argue, like, I want to keep them on the same string group, so you might want to put it there just for continuity. So you got that, you got, right, and we got, then we got all kinds of options here. Now, this is something that I feel you should do with, you know, a lot of chords, you know, even little 3-note chords like this. This is actually 3-note chords are kind of my favorite, but let's continue on. So here's our original shape again. Okay, I'll set this as the root. Here's our, all right, now what I could do is I take this fifth, which is D, and I could put it down here, and now we're on a new string group, right? If we want a little bit lower or darker sound. You see how much, just out of doing that, just ping-ponging between these shapes here. You know, our spread shape and our different string groups and inversions and stuff. You can get, even just in this one position, you've got all this really cool comping ability. Now let's continue on. Let's do that. Let's go up to our next shape. Here was the next shape, and I'm just alternating the colors so visually you can kind of see the difference, okay? So we could take, in this case, the root here, which is G, and we could put it down here. So now we would have, we'd have something like this. So we've got this on this string, and we've got, right? And then we've got the spread version, top 3 strings, these 3 strings, and now see how much, just out of that one spot right there, I've got all kinds of good stuff going on. And let's do the same thing here as our last shape here. On these 3 strings, we can bring this A note down to here. And, you know, arguably the easiest one to play. Right? There we go. So I'm just messing around with them, but you can see how many different ways that you can skin a cat here. So it's a really powerful tool. And, you know, as much as I want you to explore these shapes, what I want you to also think about is the process that I'm coming up with this stuff. So I start with an original simple shape like a Sus2 chord. My next thing is to go, well, what if I flip those notes around into what we call inversions of those, right? And then we put them on different string groups. So I have more options in different registers, right? I put them here, I can put them here. Could even spread them out, right? Take one note and pop it up an octave. So take this A note, right? Pop it up an octave. So you're getting so much mileage just out. This is all just the same chord, right? Now you could potentially go down even one step further. And you could take this A note, for example, bring it down here if you want. I tend to stay a little bit away from those lower strings like that because it starts to obscure the root a little bit. Like I said, most of the time I'm, you know, focusing on these kind of middle 3 strings here, whether sometimes a little lower or a little higher. That seems to be the sweet spot on the guitar, in my opinion. All right, so these are Sus2 chords, but like I said, if you really look at them, they can also be Sus4 chords, right? Just for a different chord. So this is a G Sus2, but it's also a D Sus4, right? Now, a C Sus2, right, is also a G Sus4. You see how much mileage? Right? And I can always resolve it back just to that major triad. So I'm just exploring these shapes. I don't really have a intention in mind here. I'm just kind of using my ear and allowing it to kind of guide me where I want to go. The next step or the next level is harmonizing this through a scale, right? So depending on your knowledge of basic music theory and stuff, you can harmonize chords through a scale, right? So in the key of G, if I take this G chord here and I just move all 3 notes up the scale, the next chord is A minor, right? And the next chord is B minor. And then C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished, and then back to G. So that's just like basic scale harmony, right? I'm hoping that everybody is somewhat aware of that. But if you're not, that is a super important tool to understand. That's what gives you your 1 chord, your 2, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth, right? So we could take this G Sus2 chord here, right? And we could harmonize it through the scale, right? So we could say, well, this is a G Sus2. Just trying to put the root on there so you can hear it. This would be an A Sus2, right? I just move those 3 notes up the scale, and that's what I get. And the next one is a little bit of an oddball because you would have B, C, and F sharp here, which, you know, because the 3 chord has a flat 2, that C is a flat 2. So this would be like an B sus flat 2, if you will. Something like that, right? So we got this shape, remains the same. It changes a little bit here, but then when we get to the C, it's the same. D is the same. E is the same. Okay, the F sharp is going to be a little odd. It's a nice sounding chord, but it's a little hard to grip that. This finger's not fretting anything, by the way. And then I'm back to here. Now, the interesting thing is I have 5 of the same shapes. I have it from the 1, which is G. I have it from the A, which is the 2 here. I have it from the 4, which is C, 5, and 6. So I've got... So without changing the shape, I've got at least 5 versions of that. And if I do want to get ambitious, I can change the shape too, okay? But then we can go through the same process that we did earlier, as we can say, okay. And I could do the here. Right? I can do it on all of these same shapes here. Right? They're just giving me a ton of options here. So let's jump over to the hand split here and let's realize what I just did here. So I'll alternate them with, you know, light and dark circles. Okay, so hopefully that'll work. So here it is, the next shape. Okay, so it's just basically the same shape up a whole step. Okay, the next shape is going to be, I'll go back to the dark here. The next one is going to be a little bit odd, both fingering wise and sound wise. Ooh, what's going on there? Okay, there we go. And then the next 3 are going to be those same shapes again. So we're going to have, and then the next one will be the same shape again. I hope this is translating visually. I know it gets a little weird here. Then we've got D, from the D note, and then from the E note here. And then we can combine these in any way that we kind of want to, right? So it's all just diatonic to G. And, you know, by learning the inversions, you can see that I can play it from G. I can play any of the inversions that we've done, any of the spread. But I can also do it from D. I can do it from C. All those spreads. Now I've just got so much comping ability here. So let me put that backing track back on again, and let's have a little fun with that. I'm just fooling around. It sounds really great, right? So not my playing, but the sound of the chords. So anyway, that's a little bit of a deep dive into some Sus2 and Sus4 sounds, right? So the first step is just find one shape on a favorable set of strings. It's just 3 notes in this case, right? I'm letting the root kind of sound or whatever, the chord sound, I'm letting that be dictated by the accompaniment behind me. So in that case, it was just G to C major 7. So I can, you know, play around with those shapes using my ear and how that particular shape makes me feel. I might want to stay on it longer. It might sound like a resolution. It might sound, again, like a little bit of a suspension. So I can make those decisions as I'm playing, move off to the next one, or trying a different inversion of it. I mean, there's so many options here, right? Now, one other thing to keep in mind is anytime you explore things diatonically, all that stuff can be applied to the modes of that key, right? So for example, the fifth mode of G is D Mixolydian, right? So basically all this stuff that I just did against it, thinking of it against G or in the key of G, I can do it with over like maybe a D7 sounding backing track. So really the only thing that has changed there is the root sound is now against the 5 chord, which is D7 in this case, right? Let's see if I can I'll find another. I'm just on YouTube fooling around, just finding backing tracks. What's the second mode of G? A Dorian. So I can use all these same shapes again in A Dorian, right? Let's see if we can find a little backing track and give it an example here. So A Dorian is basically the second chord or the second mode of G, right? So I'm just going to fool around and see what happens. Whoops, see. So same shapes I'm using. Of course, it sounds different because it's against a different chord, but that chord, A Dorian type sound, is also in the key of G, right? And I could do it with any mode of the key of G, and then of course you can transpose it to any key in any mode. So sky's the limit here, but it's such a fun sound and an interesting way to comp. Now, one of the things that I've discovered over the years being a professional player is you spend a lot of time playing rhythm guitar, right? I know it takes a lot of time and energy to learn lead guitar improvisation. I've spent many hours doing that myself, but then over time I've also tried to put as much energy into my rhythm comping and make that just as much of an artistic endeavor as my improvising, right? So now I just have chords. I'm still improvising, but I'm in the moment. It's a little bit, the thing about improvising, even when you're doing it within a structured song, when you can improvise a little bit, it keeps the excitement of playing. It just gets you away from, the same old, right? So you could take these and immediately eject these into your playing, right? And, maybe use a little effects sometimes, whatever you want to do. Get creative with it, and maybe even try to apply it to a song that you already play frequently, and maybe you'll get some new and fresh ideas out of it. All right, that's all I got for you guys today. Please like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you next time around. Cheers.